Hi, and welcome to episode 44 of the ChessTDD series. You'll notice a card here. I took a comment that somebody had left pointing out a mistake I made, I think back in episode 41. I did a rash of 3 of them together, so there was no time to make that fix between when I published the episode and the next couple, so I'm taking care of it now. Basically, I had done something dumb in the in these 2 tests here that you can see. The first 2 tests in is non-capture allowed, both pass the same arguments to the helper method. So I am going in and making the test do what it claims to do, and everything stays green. So moving on. That was a fairly quick fix. Now it's time to go and start to slay the en passant dragon. And I mentioned it in the show notes on my blog. It is going to be difficult to do this because en passant requires a fairly tight coupling between 2 of the pieces on the board. And you'll recall from all the previous episodes in this series that the pieces on the board don't know anything about one another or about the board. So this is going to require some doing, and you're going to see me thrash a little bit with how to implement this. Rightly or wrongly, the implementation that I've kind of decided to go with is more of the same subtle trickery you've maybe seen me engage in here, at least the beginnings of it, which is I am going to embed coordinates in a piece and let the piece reason about the coordinates of another piece rather than reasoning about another piece. So there's not going to be links between the pieces, but what can happen is board can pass in coordinates of piece A to piece B, and then piece A can reason about, a hypothetical piece at the coordinates of B. That's a little abstract. You'll kind of, I think, maybe see what I'm talking about as I go through this. But back right here in the moment, the way that en passant works, first of all, is important to know. You might want to go look that up, actually. But basically, if you have this special deal where on its first move, a pawn can move 2 squares. Well, the rules of chess are such that if you use that first move to kind of cheat and bypass an opponent pawn being able to threaten you, then the opponent pawn can move as if it were capturing you. It can move diagonally to an empty square and capture behind itself. So that's probably not real clear. Maybe you can pick up on this if you don't know how en passant works. Maybe you can pick up on this from what I'm describing here. So let's say that we have this scenario where the black pawn is advanced a fair bit of the way on down to 2-4. Shoot, I don't think I got this quite right yet. We need 2 moves in order to make this happen. But so if... Oh, sorry, I just gave something away. Basically, well, all right, let me just narrate this and stop trying to second guess myself. I recorded a couple of episodes at once here, so now my memory is getting a little hazy of what I did. But what I want to do here is, let's say we have this black pawn that is at 2-4. Now, if I can move that white pawn up 2 squares to 1-4, and it would be next to the black pawn. And the way en passant works is if I do that, it says, no, the black pawn can get its pound of flesh by moving to 1-3, even though there isn't a piece there to capture, and it will remove the white pawn that was next to it from the board. That's how en passant works. So, one of the things I'm noting here is... as I was writing this test, I saw an unexpected result, and instead of kind of plowing ahead, it's important to go back and think through why I'm seeing an unexpected result. So I had noticed there that this was saying there were 2 possible moves for that black pawn, and that's not right. The reason there were 2 moves is because I had just plopped it right there on the board, and you'll recall that if it's the first move, the pawn can move 2 squares. So that's what I was saying about giving away before. I needed to make 2 moves. So we need to do something so that the black pawn, when it gets there to 2-4, that's not its first move. So anyway, hopefully that's all squared away. So I have to have that black pawn move 1, and then I have to move the white one next to it. And then once I've done that, now I'm in the en passant condition, and that black pawn should have, it should be able to move 1 ahead, but it should also be able to do that funny en passant capture. And that's what the red test is now. So I'm back to it making sense. But what's up next here for me is to flail around a lot through this and the next episode. I kind of like, okay, so how do I express this? Is en passant a capture move, or is it a non-capture move, first of all, in the parlance of how I've implemented this so far? On the one hand, en passant is a capture. An opponent piece is removed from the board when you do it, but in terms of what I've implemented so far, it would be a non-capture, because the piece in question will be moving to a square that is not occupied by an opponent's piece. So I started thinking about strategies for representing that. Like, the easiest thing I can think of to do to get this test passing is to somehow, in pawn with this is non-capture allowed, be returning true in this specific scenario. So right now, diagonal for a pawn is a capture move. So I need to be able to say, hey, in some cases, when we're checking the diagonal move for legality, in some cases, I need to allow that as a non-capture move. Then the question becomes, well, how do I understand what those cases are? And what my thinking is that board, in the beginning, I said, okay, well, what if we set a flag? When there was one of these two moves from start things that would enable en passant, why don't I set a flag on the pawn that moved to say that, hey, this pawn is subject to capture by en passant? That was something that easily occurred to me. So it wouldn't violate this constraint that I'd set up saying I don't want the pieces to know about the board or one another. If instead it just has a flag set on it by the board, then that conforms to the constraint. So instead of just going ahead and doing that, I'm going to move to some test-driven development here as an implementation. And reason through, okay, what are the scenarios where I'll set this up, and I'll be able to trigger when this flag should be set and then verify that it's set. So what I'm going to do is go with this context-dependent test setup, and I'm going to say that the move piece, that's kind of what I want to test. I want to test that move piece is having a side effect on the piece that's getting moved. Although, as a spoiler, I will eventually go to a slightly different implementation because I'm going to get into a bit of a blind alley here. But the concept sort of remains intact. Move piece triggers a flag to get set on a piece on the board. And then later we evaluate that flag to understand whether or not certain actions can be taken. And, a lesson to take away from this is really when you start, this mimics like a non-trivial domain very well. Well, I shouldn't even say that it is a non-trivial domain. And so in a lot of the katas that you'll see and things people do, here's like how to do Roman numerals with test-driven development. You don't incur the same eventual slowdown and pain that you can in a code base like this. So basically, we've got pretty much all of like normal chess implemented. Oh, but then the edge cases come in. And this is where you really start to see the importance of having a test suite. Because for all the complexity we've done so far, these last few concepts like castling and en passant, it's almost like those account for 50 or more % of the total complexity. So like, even though it's really close and we could like ship this and tell our users like, oh, don't worry, we'll support en passant in a future release. I'm actually kind of kidding. I wouldn't advocate shipping a non-functional game of chess, but to illustrate the point, I guess, that you might see in your domains, like we could ship this and, functionality-wise, maybe we're like 90% of the way there, but it is these edge cases that really test your design. And you can see me kind of going through some contortions here to keep some of the design principles that I set up initially. And what having a pretty comprehensive test suite allows you to do is kind of revisit those designs. And what I'm leaning towards doing here, frankly, is to not revisit design too much. I kind of want to finish up the series, and then I think I might do a productized thing where perhaps I do a reevaluation of the design afterwards, and then I refactor towards cleaner design as I go, and do some static analysis and some other things on it, and talk more in depth about some of the tools I'm using. So stay tuned for that. I'm thinking I will keep this series free on YouTube and everything, but then I might package up a purchased product where I kind of tie it up the way I might for something in production, and take you through how to do that. So anyway, the long and short of it is, we're getting to a place where, hey, maybe those original design assumptions, or not assumptions, constraints I set out don't make sense. Like, maybe it isn't that we should have this one-way dependency where board knows about the pieces but not vice versa. Maybe there's a different way to slice this application that will sort of wipe out some of this complexity that we're putting in here and is making this application confusing to reason about. So long story short, the lesson to take away is that it gets really hard to revisit your design without a comprehensive regression test suite, without these unit and acceptance tests. If you were to go in here and make a pull request and delete all the tests, and I were crazy enough to accept that, and I couldn't get them back, I would be absolutely terrified to change this design. So if we shipped it and it worked and people were able to play chess games, and you said, hey, this is a little confusing, let's refactor it, I would tell you that you were absolutely insane. Why would you touch the design? It's working. And that's what you really see with legacy code bases. In unlike chess, where you can say, yeah, I played a bunch of games of chess and it worked. In the real world, you'd have project managers and marketing people that would come in and be like, what would be awesome is this like addition to the rules of chess. And like, we did some research and product market fit and stuff. And then they would make you change it, and you would be terrified to change it because it was working, and you would have no idea if you were breaking things, and you'd be trapped because you'd have to do a little bit of change for the new features. But yeah, anyway, done stumping for having a regression test suite. I'm not necessarily trying to get you to be a student of TDD per se, but I'm telling you, I could not live without it. Okay, so back to the present. What I'm doing is, as you've seen me do a number of times, and it is a valuable thing to do, is I'm recreating the kind of bare bones feel of the acceptance test in this unit test. So I've set up a standard chessboard. I'm moving the black pawn that starts out at 2-7 up to 2-5, and then I'm moving it again from 2-5 to 2-4. Never mind that, we're not trading off moves and that black is moving first. For the purposes of these unit tests, it's not especially important to do a legal chess game per se. So I get the black piece into position, and then I move the white piece up to be even with the black piece, which is, I just discussed as a violation. Well, it's a thing that triggers en passant to be an option. And then I'm writing this test to say that, is the piece vulnerable to en passant? So if I go get the moves for that black pawn, or I'm sorry, if I go get that black pawn, no, one more time. If I go get the white pawn that just moved, it should be vulnerable to en passant. You will see, I'll change the implementation in a little bit here, so you'll understand why I'm confused. Long and short of it is that I eventually realized the implementation will go a lot better if instead of flagging the vulnerable piece, I flag the piece that can perform the en passant. So that's why I was getting a little tongue-tied there. But at the moment, I've got this implementation that I used for TDD to get at least a partially appropriate implementation of this flag. And what I want to do now is I think I can use this flag to get my acceptance test to pass. And that's a lesson to take away right there too, which is If you're going to kind of do this varied level of abstraction with letting tests drive your design, it's fine to write a failing acceptance test and then to dive in with more granular unit tests. But keep in mind that you still want to kind of work towards getting your acceptance test to pass as quickly as possible. You can write more specific red tests and have multiple red tests, but what you don't want to do is spend long periods of time with any test red, even an acceptance test that's at like kind of the outer layers of granularity. It's just kind of bad form in general. And it's good practice if you resolve even to keep those less granular tests from being read for too long, it will drive you at slicing thinly in your design or in your approach to the tests. So you don't want to like write an acceptance test that like takes you through an entire game of chess, have that go red, and then, you know, cycle through, dozens of unit tests to get that to green. Slice off a very simple acceptance test and get that to green, and then do the next like simple acceptance test you can think of. That's what I'm doing here. And you can see that even with this pretty reasonably thin slice, just one specific en passant scenario, I'm having some trouble. In sort of broad terms, what I was thinking when I was doing this is if I can just get it to understand when there's en passant happening, I can use that to trigger the diagonal being allowed for non-capture, which is, I think a fairly sound piece of reasoning. I don't think I was crazy. And I don't remember exactly what was wrong here. In the remainder of this episode and in the next episode, I'm going to go through some incarnations of how I implement this. The main thing that I'm failing to account for here, and I figure it out quickly enough to put in a horrible hack and wrap up this episode in 20-ish minutes, which I'm really making a point to try to do. The thing I figured out that was a problem was just flagging that the piece is eligible or vulnerable to en passant, or even what I was talking about before and figuring out that a piece could perform en passant. With the way I was doing it with just a simple flag, it's going to allow both diagonal forward motions. So in kind of one swoop here, I decided I'm going to need to flip around and figure out about performing en passant. And the reason for that is that vulnerable to en passant, you're not looking to alter the movement of the piece that's vulnerable. You're looking to alter the movement of the piece that will be performing it. So that's, I probably should have thought of that out of the gate, but again, no filter. You're just watching me figure out stuff as I go. And I got to be honest, I don't write a whole lot of code anymore these days, so I'm fighting some rust too. So now I have to flip that around. I'm going to change the name of this test, and then I'm going to change the name of the property. So to perform a simple rename is fairly straightforward. There's going to be more coming with that later. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to change which piece I'm retrieving. So I'm no longer going to get the white piece. I'm going to go get that piece that's black. And I want to assert that it's true that the black piece can perform en passant in this scenario. So this is an interesting one. I want to get this test to green. And the simplest way to do that might actually be to flip the other test around too. You get into these sort of like odd scenarios. But the way I opted to do this was to kind of go in here and say like, all right, well, before when I had moved the piece, and that was what I was thinking, move piece, this is easy. So I'm going to make a movement and then I'm going to set myself vulnerable to en passant. What I have to do here is when there's a movement, if it is an en passant scenario that's triggered, I have to figure out, I'm not going to set it for myself. I'm going to figure out that there's another pawn next to me. And I'm going to sort of tell that pawn in the board, like conceptually, if you think of it from the pawn's point of view, if I'm the white pawn, I move and I'm kind of like telling the pawn next to me that's black, hey, you can capture me now. I'm vulnerable. So, you know, I'm flipping this flag over, or I'm flipping your flag over because I'm vulnerable. More or less is what's going on here. Now, at this point, I saw the clock getting darn near the minutes limit I had sort of put for myself, so I was really kind of moving to get to green so I could check this in and go on to the next episode. And that's kind of been a theme here, especially as I try to be cognizant of time and not let myself record these 30-minute episodes. But it's kind of a good thing to see too, because it forces me to have it even tighter, you know, in getting to green. Sure, I can put some, you know, pretty things in here, but hey, if everything's green and I'm being true to that, I can always refactor, and I don't mind doing ugly things at first. So I'm figuring out at this moment, how am I getting all these different, you know, exceptions, and why is this happening? And okay, no, I'm no longer throwing an exception. So you see me sort of like playing with off by one type of stuff and whatnot. That is all, you know, another lesson to take away. Playing around like that is all fine and good when you're trying to get to green. And I've said it before, the only thing that's really important is when you, when all is said and done and the dust settles and you're green, you need to make sure you understand why you got green. It's okay not to understand it in the moment, but you can't like leave it not understanding. It didn't really turn out to be my problem here. I was more just kind of cruising along quickly and reasoning my way through this whole like, hey, oops, I am, you know, I've got this problem with two different pieces being flagged legal, or two different moves being flagged legal for en passant. And this was kind of the coup de grace here. I was like, you know, the aha moment where I said, oh, I've got to narrow it down. So I'm only setting is capture allowed for one of these situations. And the way I did that was just to throw this check in here. And don't worry, that's going to come out later. We're going to get smarter about it in the next episode. But hey, I just made a note to myself in the Trello card saying that, like, you know, this needs a lot of work. We've, by hook or crook, gotten one acceptance scenario to pass, but, and it's a start, that's good. But like, this is not by any stretch of the imagination correct. We might be like, I don't know, 10% correct for en passant. Certainly wouldn't work going in the opposite direction. It doesn't even work going to the other side of the pawn, but it's a start. So I'm going to commit episode 44 here and push it up to master on GitHub, and I'm going to call it. And oh yeah, I got a little been paranoid as people reported that I'm having troubles with you know, some missing files. I'm a little paranoid about that. So I checked on that and then pushed it all on up. And that's it. I will see you next time.